Our design unit is on Classifying Animals by Sydney Kleina and Star Kuttenberg.
Our unit will be taught to a third grade classroom. In this unit, students will discover the traits of each group of animals and learn to sort different types of animals into the major groups. Students have already learned about living things and what makes a living thing, and they've completed a unit on plants. So this is the beginning of their animal unit. My role is an ESL resource teacher, so sometimes I pull the students out and sometimes I push into the general education classroom. In this case, I will be pushing into the third grade science classroom. The students in this class are very diverse. Students, some of them are very high scoring students. They score well on tests and are reading above their level. There are also students with IEPs that require some assistive technology for reading and writing. My students that I work very closely with are all English language learners, and they range anywhere from developing English to emerging, needing higher levels of support.
In my classroom, I have all second and third grade students, and I teach in a self-contained special education classroom. This means that each student in my classroom has an IEP with their own accommodations. Each student does all of their academics in my classroom, and none are done in the general education classroom. Each student follows a reading curriculum, and in that I embed our science curriculum because we do not have a typical science that we do every day. Our standards and objectives for this project are standards. We did one for science and one for reading. So our science standard have students describe organisms, and then our reading one has students write informative text where they introduce a topic. So this will be their final project. Our objectives are that students will classify animals into 5 major groups. Students will answer 5 questions on a template about their animal, and that students will complete their research project scoring 80% or above on the rubric.
For this unit, the prescriptive design strategy that we used is David Jonason's Modeling with Hypermedia. In his book, Jonason outlines a strategy for students to use technology to model their learning. It's more about the design process where students are engaged in designing knowledge. So in this unit, we're using the information about groups of animals with the task of creating a Google Slides presentation in mind. Students will go through the steps of Jonason's prescriptive design strategy while they prepare and create their presentation. The first step is to make a plan. For this, we're going to provide the students with some guiding questions as they begin to learn about animals, do research, and begin preparing their presentation. We'll also give them some graphic organizers to get them, thinking about how to organize the information they're coming up with. And step 2 is where they begin to design the actual presentation and begin doing the research. Step 3 and step 4 kind of go together. Step 3, they'll elicit the feedback from their peers. And then in step 4, they'll have a chance to revise based upon that feedback. And then finally, in step 5, students will reflect on the activity, and we have some evaluations and reflections at the end that will help students to accomplish that step. The main technology tool we're going to be using for this unit is Google Slides. Google Slides is a presentation tool that students can use to create their presentation. They are going to use this tool to organize their information and to create slides about each of the questions they're answering about their different animals. It has a lot of benefits to it. One of them is the read and write application, which allows students to speak into a microphone and it will write for them, or it'll convert text to speech as well. This is a very important tool for our EL and special ed students. Another technology tool that we're going to use is a website called Rewordify. This resource allows students to copy and paste difficult, challenging text into the box, and it converts it to more simple and easier to understand text. Again, this is very important for our students with special learning needs and for English learners so that they can access the content without struggling to read the complex text. And finally, one more tool that we're going to use to increase engagement is BrainPop's Sortify game on animals. This resource allows students to virtually sort animals into different groups and label their groups. We'll use this a couple different times throughout the unit.
So our day-to-day description, for day 1, we're going to be introducing the unit, and this is where our first student handout will be given, and that'll be shown in just a little bit. Students will start by doing the BrainPop Sortify game. This will get students excited for the unit and kind of give a little glimpse of what the unit will look like. And then on that day 1, students will be doing classifications of mammals and reptiles, and then they will be completing an exit ticket to show what they learned that day. On day 2, we'll be reviewing with questions from the day before, and then we will move into classification of birds and fish. And students will, again, complete an exit ticket about the information that they learned that day. On day 3, students will start by reviewing with questions. Then students will be learning the classification of amphibians. This will be the last group that students are learning about. So then after this, they will be reviewing using BrainPop Sortify to make sure that they understood the content that they've learned so far. They will complete their last exit ticket. On day 4, students will choose an animal for the project. Days 5 and 6, students will be researching the chosen animal. They'll be answering guided questions on a template, and then they'll be using Rewordify if they need to simplify the text that they're reading. On days 7 and 8, students will be inputting information into Google Slides. We will have templates available if needed with their accommodations, which we'll talk about in just a second. And students could be using Rewordify to copy and paste information right into their presentations. On day 9, students will be presenting their Google Slides to their class and answering any questions other students may have. The differentiation in our project mainly comes from our Google Slides. So when students are creating their presentations, we will have templates depending on student need. So one can simply look like having the categories labeled at the top. So habitat, diet, and students would input their information into those slides. For a more intense accommodation, we can have multiple choice answers, and students are able to highlight or circle the answer that goes along with their animal. And also, when they're using Google Slides, Read and Write is available on Google, which allows students to use text-to-speech or speech-to-text. So our 2 handouts, the first one on the left talks about the Intro to Animals unit. This gives students, it shows what type of animals they're going to be learning about. It shows that they will be using BrainPop. And then at the bottom there, it explains what pieces of information they're going to need to find about their animal. The handout on the right is kind of a summary page on the groups of vertebrates. And so it has the 5 groups that we learned about. So when students are going to pick their animal, they can look this over.
This is an example of a student artifact that will be shared with students so that they understand what their project may look like. That we show them what each slide might look like and how each one is expected to have some text and images about their animal. Here you'll find a small screenshot of part of the online student resources that we will include for the students. On this, we'll have the learning objectives posted again, as well as a digital copy of both handouts. There's also this sample project that students can reference while they're working. And in the other resources, we have links to both Rewordify and the BrainPop Sortify game that students can access throughout the unit. The technology we chose for our unit is an example of both augmentation and modification. Google Slides is not just replacing a traditional method of writing a report, but it's augmenting it because it allows students access to tools that they couldn't use if they were creating a poster or an essay. Google's Read and Write, for example, converts speech to text and text to speech, and this allows the students to get their ideas across without having to rely on their writing skills if they are struggling writers. Google Slides allows teachers to include different levels of support for students who may need more sentence frames or a structured slideshow, and it allows other students the freedom to create however they would like it to be. Also, using BrainPop Sortify is another example of augmentation. The Sortify is a little bit similar to when students would cut out and glue animals onto a project, but this is augmented because it provides them instant feedback. Otherwise, they'd have to turn it in and have it graded. This one will automatically remove the animal if they're not sorted into the right category. And also, it's kind of dynamic. They can sort things into different groups and label them differently. There's not only one right answer. And then finally, Rewordify is an example of modification. This is something that opens a new world to students with limited English or reading abilities due to a learning disability. In this case, students are able to access the content with complex text in a way that they weren't able to access it before. They're able to understand it in simpler terms, and this is a true modification for them.
So lastly, our summative evaluation. To assess student learning of content, we'll be creating a rubric for the final project. This will have type of animal, habitat, diet, behavior, and fun fact. This is to make sure that students include these in their projects. To assess the effectiveness of the unit's design, students will be completing an exit slip each day to review the type of animal they learned about.